Today we're discussing how should you measure the success of your demand generation program. Welcome to the B2B Playbook. We built this channel for small B2B marketing teams who want to drive more revenue for their business. Every week, we're showing you how to create more demand for your brand step by step using our 5Bs framework. So if you're time poor, resource strapped, but you still want to make a big impact on your business, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below so you don't miss an episode. Welcome back to the B2B Playbook. Today we're discussing how should you measure the success of your demand generation program. We are deep into season 6 of the B2B Playbook podcast, which is where Kevin and I show you step by step how to generate demand. We've detailed it over the first 1 to 5 seasons, Kev. We gave people our 5Bs framework for demand generation. Season 6, we're right in the juicy end of our mini series on all things demand generation, answering a whole lot of frequently asked questions. We've really defined exactly what demand generation is, how to build a business case, who it's suited to, and a whole lot more. Please go back and check out those episodes if you haven't already. Kevin, for anyone who's new to the show, can you please give them a quick overview of what our 5Bs framework for demand generation is all about?
The 5Bs framework that we've espoused on this podcast for demand generation covers be ready, be helpful, be seen, be better, and be the best. We begin by deeply understanding our dream customers, then developing relationships of trust with them online through very helpful content. And in Be Seen, we look at how to amplify that helpful content and really focus in on the dream customers, on the levers that's really going to get that information in front of the right people. And in the final 2 seasons, or the final 2 Bs rather, we talked about how to optimize your B2B marketing process and also incorporate some of those advanced strategies and tactics that the guys at the bigger end of town use and how you can incorporate it into your own marketing, as well as how to use this whole framework over time to keep delivering results. And following on from that, today we're continuing our mini series on demand generation. As George said, the question that we're answering today that we've covered in a few other instances on the podcast as well, but we thought it would be a great time to revisit, is how should you measure success in your demand generation program?
Very good. Thank you, Kevin. And while you've been doing that, I've been busy just throwing on our whiteboard, actually the flywheel that we've finally created for our 5Bs framework. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Kevin, but we whipped that one up in Canva. And
It's very good, George. It's very good. It's a departure from your usual drawings and sketches. Obviously, Canva has done some of the heavy lifting there, but kudos to you for getting that done and across the line for our listeners.
yeah, Kevin, I would say the main limitation there was I just can't draw a circle. So for those who aren't watching this on YouTube, the 5Bs framework is really a flywheel and it's cyclical. And so you've got to go from one step to the next. And then once you work through all 5 stages, you start again. And the reason for that is this is not a one and done activity. Every time you go through and you do this process for your business, you get one step closer to really understanding who your dream customers are. Then even better how you can serve them, how you can build the relationships of trust. You understand better how to accelerate demand of people who are really starting to express some interest in your product. And so you get your motions there working better. You keep optimizing processes as you scale. And then, of course, you keep working some advanced tactics in. And then, Kevin, you should then go and start again, all the way back to be ready, defining your target customers again. So make sure you check us out on YouTube, guys, because we show all these graphics. This one not hand-drawn, but there's a lot of hand-drawn ones today as well to really help illustrate this point even further. And it's something, Kevin, that I think we'll be showing off more and more over future episodes.
Yes, definitely a great visual aid for the 5Bs framework, the one that we talk about all the time on the show. And I think listeners want to really see in that circle format because, as George said, that's really how we hope it is intended. We hope that you use it over time. So jumping back into today's topic of how to measure success for your demand generation program. And the context here is that every B2B marketer, ourselves included, faces the same challenges of justifying our activities, whether that's to each other, to ourselves, to executives, importantly to other teams as well, like sales. We regularly get marketers sliding into our DMs, asking questions like, how can I improve the effectiveness of my paid social efforts to justify that spend to the CEO, to my supervisor, to the head of insert whatever title you'd like? Or the question might come in the form of, how can I measure the impact of our content? We know it's working. We know that these things are having an impact, but how do we exactly measure that impact and show that off to the powers that may be. And even more simply, sometimes we get that question of how can I show that our marketing is helping contribute to bottom line revenue?
So, because of all that, Kev, today we're going to give our listeners really the 3 tiers of demand generation reporting that we think you need to show to first show that you're on the right track, and then eventually show that marketing is actively contributing to the business and it's really aligned with sales and it's helping drive the business forward. But before we dive into that, I think it's first important, Kevin, for us to tackle the idea of should we be thinking about marketing's impact in terms of marketing sourced revenue or marketing influenced revenue? And for those of you who aren't familiar with what those are, marketing sourced revenue or marketing sourced pipeline is really pipeline that's generated by initiatives that marketing have started. So the marketing department is the initiator of that campaign or event. The leads that are generated by these campaigns are technically marketing sourced. And you would say that effectively that sales opportunity wouldn't exist without the marketing department. In contrast, marketing influence pipeline is really just all pipeline where marketing has influenced the main context in that opportunity. So let's say that your sales team is in the middle of a sales cycle. The main contacts of that sales opportunity visit your website, they download a bunch of white papers. As they've engaged with some of your marketing campaigns, this would now technically be marketing influenced. Sales cycles at B2B organizations, as you guys know, are pretty complex. They might take months to complete. And throughout the duration of the sales cycle, the chances are that they engage with some of your marketing content is pretty damn high. So I would say, Kev, in reality, almost all sales cycles are marketing influenced. So that's the 2 there. And which should you use? That's the big question, Kevin. And I think it's a really big, it depends. I think using marketing sourced pipeline as a KPI probably oversimplifies the complexity of the B2B buying cycle. It assumes really a first touch or a last touch attribution model, and it doesn't really take into account the multiple buyers and touch points that are involved. So let's say, for example, if a prospect downloads a white paper and 6 months later, sales runs an outbound motion to re-engage them, who gets the credit? If it's marketing, sales may feel disgruntled and vice versa, potentially creating tension between the 2 teams. But Kevin, on the other hand, marketing influence can also lead to lazy touches from the marketing team, right? Like they're running content with little to no impact, but they're able to show, hey, this person engaged with our ad, they clicked on our ad. So which one is best is really difficult to say. So, Kevin, I wouldn't get really hung up on whether you're measuring marketing sourced or marketing influence. I think the most important thing is that there's really a joint understanding of who your ideal customers are between sales and the marketing team, and that you're working together to report on demand generation and showing that this select group of companies, these people who match our ICP, are getting closer to buying, that we're building their trust, that sales are having meaningful interactions with them, and then that's turning into pipeline. Whatever method of measurement, whether it's marketing influenced or marketing sourced, works better for your business. That is ultimately up to you guys, but I wouldn't get super hung up on it. Just make sure there's that key alignment. With all of that said, Kev, let's now kick into our 3-tiered measurement framework for demand generation. And again, we've got that up on our screen. We're going to break it down. Really, there's 3 key tiers, Kevin. Tier 3 is probably our lowest level. It's the one that you want to look for to see, is the marketing that we're doing showing that there are signs that our demand gen program is starting to have an impact, but there may not be any pipeline or revenue yet. But hey, what we're doing is working. Let's stick to the program. Tier 2 is we can start to see that there's some pipeline filtering through from our demand gen program. That's great signs. Let's keep on track. And then tier 1 is ultimately what we want to work towards, Kevin. It shows that marketing is clearly contributing revenue from this program. Carry on and look to scale it up. And now we're going to dive into each of these 3 tiers in more detail. All right, Kev, why don't you kick us off by telling us all about really what tier 3 for reporting for demand generation is in our framework?
All right, listeners, here we go. So tier 3 reporting, as George has alluded to before, this is where you're really starting off immediately from the get-go. You're looking at it potentially daily, and particularly at the start when you're launching a demand generation, you want to see how that's going. And effectively in this tier, what you're looking for is initially that you've launched that new demand generation campaign and it's going in the right direction. So let's say, for example, you're launching an employee advocacy program, getting your subject matter experts, the C-suites, evangelists to start regularly posting helpful content on LinkedIn. And at this tier 3, your measurements really help you look for signs of life, that this particular campaign is actually having a positive impact on your market of dream customers, that there is indeed life in the machine that you've just built and it's working in the right direction. So it's our way of showing that, hey, you're not actually having that pipeline or revenue source impact from these activities just yet, but things are on the right track. And most likely that will be the case for the first 90 days or so at least. So the channel metrics here, in terms of the KPIs you're looking at, will vary depending on the channels that you're using, that you figured out are the right ones to use, but largely they will consist of a combination of the following. So there's a bit of quantitative data involved that you can have a look at. And this kind of tells you what's happened. So it's hard numbers that you can find in your analytics platforms like Google Analytics, or wherever you have reporting your channel platform, or even within the channel platforms themselves, you can find that sort of reporting. And great sources of this quantitative data to look at include things like, what were the collective views on a post for your company page? How many views are you getting? How many company page posts did you get, and what were the average views, or how many views for a particular post did you get? Importantly, you can see it from your ICP. So a lot of different tools out there to reveal who's actually looking at things, but LinkedIn is a good source of that. It will tell you the sort of companies and some of the firmographics around those people that are in your audience for your particular post on your company page. That's a quantitative point, a data point to have a look at, including those collective views on posts. You can also have a look at the collective views on posts from your employees and other subject matter experts that you've engaged in your campaign. So that moves away from your company page, but looks at those people in your business and around your business who are also having that sort of impact on getting that reach with your ICP. Again, if you can get to that ICP level, that would be great. So potentially connecting your employees' data in some way, shape, or form, and even sharing that data with the subject matter experts that you've engaged for particular pieces of content. Also have a look at things like engagement rates. So did those ICPs then click and interact with your social posts? How far down your landing page did they scroll? There's very simple things you can do in things like Google Tag Manager to tag up these sort of activities to get that data flowing in. If you're not sure, there's plenty of documentation online as well for that kind of thing. But what you're looking for, is there any engagement of that initial contact of views from your ICP? Now, again, we'd want to qualify that at this point in time, it's likely that a lot of people, particularly on LinkedIn, aren't going to engage necessarily or interact with your posts, but you're looking for signs of life. So even if those rates are low, if they're improving, or if they're there at all, then that's a good sign that there's potential for improvement. You're hitting the right sort of people, or things are going in the right direction for you to improve on. But just keep in mind that engagement rates will probably be quite low, particularly on LinkedIn platform. It's a much more passive platform. People don't tend to react too much there. You can also look at things like new followers for your company page. So obviously that's a great one. In fact, a lot of the times people might actually follow your page if they come to learn about your brand. They might not necessarily engage with any of the posts right off the bat. And new followers for your company page or your employee accounts from your ICP is particularly important. So one thing we'd like to call out is Phantom Buster, that helps pull all your new followers and run analysis across companies and titles and see if they're actually from your ICP. So again, trying to tie back the data point to your actual ICP, because that's what we're driving towards. We're trying to get signals from the quantitative data to show that, in fact, you're actually having that impact of reach and interaction from your ICP. The last couple here, you can view which companies have been seeing your LinkedIn posts, or we mentioned that earlier. LinkedIn Analytics tools covers a lot of this stuff when you look at the collective views on your company page and employees and things like that. Again, very important to see if those companies match your ICP's companies as well. And finally, the amount of traffic who are visiting your website from your ICPs. Again, you can use traffic revealing software, things like Clearbit's free trial, A lot of these things can be done for cheap or free alternatives before you really invest into something that costs money. You just want to see and get an indicator that, in fact, it is that match, again, from the traffic to your website, from your ICP as well, not just to your social pages. That helpful content on your social activity is actually translating into traffic from that same pool of people as well. So that's the quantitative data in that tier 3 measurement when you first start things off.
Kev, I just want to reiterate for our listeners that we're just providing an example of one particular channel for tier 3. And that the example that we've given is if you use LinkedIn as a method for distributing your content, then that's a channel that we really want to measure. And so all the examples we gave were really around what signals should we look at from LinkedIn, what quantitative signals should we look at from LinkedIn to know we're on the right track. But this could equally apply to any other channel that you're using. So let's say that email is your primary method for trying to get in front of your dream customers. You can still look at things like engagement rates. You can see at open rates. You can look at click-through rates. You can look at tracking how many new subscribers you're getting week on week. And of those, how many fit within your ICP. It's still very relevant to see, are you getting more traffic on your website visiting from your ICP? All of this stuff still applies, but these are just the channel level metrics, and you can apply this to any channel that you guys are choosing to use to get your very helpful content in front of your dream customers. Moving to the qualitative data, and as we said, the quantitative tells us what happened. The qualitative often tells us why things happen. And some good sources for that for our tier 3 metrics are your customers mentioning your content in their conversations with sales? We often hear from clients that the content that they've created that's really helpful content is often mentioned by their customers as a key touch point, particularly when sales directly ask them, hey, how did you first hear about our business, or what really made you get in contact with us? And that's when people start to mention, oh, I've been following you guys for a while. I find your articles on XYZ really helpful. Or maybe I've been following your newsletter for a while. Or, hey, I listened to your podcast. All that kind of stuff starts to get mentioned when sales directly ask the customer what made you contact us in the first place. Other points of qualitative data could be your employees or subject matter experts receiving DMs on LinkedIn about your content. This one happens more when you're marketing to marketers, tend to be maybe a little more social, a little more active on LinkedIn, Kevin, as a general rule. And so when content strikes a chord with them, often you'll get that feedback on social. And so that's also something to look out for is, are they receiving feedback that their content is making an impact? And then finally, again, this is probably one that's a little more for marketers and people marketing to groups that tend to be a bit more active is, are your ICP commenting on your content? And if so, what are they saying? We often find, Kevin, that the best content often sees our ICP tagging each other in the comments section of the content to draw attention to it as a valuable resource. So often we have marketers tagging the rest of their team or other marketers showing, hey, like this is a really helpful resource. This is a great episode. You should really tune into it. That's great feedback for us to then know that we've definitely struck a chord, that this is something that's really useful to people and that it's actively building trust with them. So that is the quantitative and the qualitative data, Kevin, that we think people should be looking out for when it comes to their tier 3 measurement for demand generation. And again, for anyone listening, we've got all of this up in a nice table, very neat. So go and check it out on YouTube. Kevin, let's move on to tier 2. So what is tier 2 trying to do?
I should also call out listeners that if you're checking it out on YouTube, there's also an article that goes with all this that George has very kindly put together that goes into all the detail that we talk about on this particular episode. A quick shout out to George again for that piece of content, which has been ranking quite high on Google for measuring demand generation. So for those of you curious, make sure to check that out in the Google search results as well. But jumping back into tier 2 reporting, again, this is something that you should be looking at immediately, but you probably want to be looking at it on a more weekly basis rather than daily. And realistically, it's going to take even more time to really see an uplift here in this tier 2 reporting versus your tier 3 when you first start your demand generation activity. That is just a simple byproduct of the fact that people aren't familiar with your brand and it takes time to build that trust with your content. Again, we've split it into quantitative and qualitative, and jumping right into quantitative data at tier two, you should definitely be looking at something called Hero Pipeline. And Hero stands for high intent revenue opportunity. So you can define this however you like within your particular organization. But basically, it means that there's a particular stage in your deal pipeline where opportunities close at 25% or more. And that might be trailing at a 6 month period. So the goal here is to increase the number of opportunities that get to this stage within your pipeline. And it doesn't necessarily have to be marketing sourced, because it can be really difficult to measure the impact that demand creation programs have, particularly when they're coming from marketing, particularly when it's not last touch. The tracking gets worse and worse over time as privacy changes have been coming in to the online space. But we just want to make sure that number of opportunities to that deal stage keeps increasing quarter over quarter. You want to be working as a team with your sales team members, whether that's them driving things up, whether that's you driving up, as long as you're both tracking, you're agreeing that is increasing quarter over quarter, then that's a good metric that really helps align both teams, because it means the two are actually working together to create as many high quality opportunities as possible. And the way you can think about this is, if the sales team are not doing a good job at closing high quality leads that you bring in, then that number is certainly going to be going down. But at the same time, if you're not bringing in high quality enough leads and you're just giving them more and more junk leads, they won't have time to close as many. And that ratio will dip below 25% as well. So it really has to be both parties coming to the table and working in the same direction and doing a good job for that rate to be going up. And so that's why it's important to look at that together between marketing and sales, and just agree that if it's increasing quarter on quarter, then you're both doing a good job.
Very good, Kevin. Okay, now for tier two, let's also look at the qualitative data. So, again, this is the data that's not easily reduced to numbers. What can we look at there? Some good sources of qualitative data for tier two for our demand generation measurement system is sales feedback. Let's have weekly meetings with sales to get feedback from them to understand the quality of opportunities that are coming through. Ideally, we want these to be improving. Ideally, when sales meet with them, they're more aware of your brand, they're more educated around the product, they're more educated around the particular use case that would be so beneficial to them. Those are all great signs that your demand generation program is actually helping to progress them down that funnel, Kevin, or through those stages of awareness. So by the time they talk to sales, a lot of that work is being done for them already. So, very important to have that sales feedback loop. Another way, Kevin, that we can get qualitative data here is getting feedback from buyers in market. And again, this is likely to come from sales. So sales should pass on any mention of your helpful demand gen programs, like your podcast or webinar, from an existing or potential client. So again, prompting them, just like in tier three, channel metrics to look at, prompting them to say, hey, how did you first hear about us, or what led you to book a meeting with us? And see if they can cite any of your helpful content programs is going to be a great way to know that this is really actually helping progress things. Finally, Kevin, self-reported attribution. It's a really, really big one. It's a fancy little phrase. Literally, all it means is whenever you have a form on your website, Kevin, or somewhere that the customer fills out to get in contact with you, to book a demo, whatever it might be, make sure you ask them, how did you first hear about us? It should be a mandatory open text field. It forces your dream customers to really recall the touch point that had the most impact on them. Often these touch points, Kevin, they're lost when you're running programs that build great affinity with your dream customers, but they just don't necessarily lead them to go and click and sign up to your program, meaning that impact is ultimately lost or diminished when running analysis in your CRM or other platforms that rely on like click and then attribution data.
And listeners, because of that misleading nature of just using your CRM data or just using self-reported attribution, either way, it's not giving you the full picture. It's important here at tier two to also think about something called hybrid attribution. So you want to use a combination of that software attribution and the self-reported attribution, but potentially for different purposes. The software attribution, the kind of reports that you get access to from your CRM or your paid ads platforms, they're great for telling you how that demand is captured. For example, at what point were your prospects in their long buying journey finally able to get ready and request that demo or contact your team? How did they do that? What's that final touch point that got them across the line? Was it searching and clicking on your Google or LinkedIn ad? Was it a branded organic search? Did they just come from your website directly? The goal here is to make sure that you're capturing the demand as efficiently as possible by improving things like your conversion rate on your landing page, the precision with which you're targeting your ads, and things like that that really affect that demand capture stage. Self-reported attribution, on the other hand, can be a great way to tell you how that demand was created in the first place. In other words, how did your demand generation programs make your prospects aware of your brand and build enough affinity with them until they became ready to buy from you and move into that demand capture stage? This is where we often see the success of our channels like your podcast, LinkedIn organic activity, or even videos on YouTube channels really shine through, but often discounted and completely missing from your CRM report. So it's really important to look at those self-reported attribution sources when you're actually looking at that question of, is your demand generation programs working and what you should do to improve those programs.
All right, Kevin, let's dive into tier one reporting, which is really what we want people to ultimately be looking towards when they're measuring their demand generation efforts. It's something that you certainly work up to, again, from tier 3 to tier 2, and then eventually tier 1. And we should really be measuring this tier 1 reporting as the program matures, because if you measure it early on, you're probably not going to see a whole lot there, and you definitely look at it quarterly. So tier 1's demand generation measurements is often marketing's KPI, Kev, and it's marketing's way of saying, hey, we're actually accountable for driving the business forward. We're having a real impact. And this is a goal that every marketer should have with a mature demand generation program. And probably, Kevin, 3 key KPIs to measure here are website sourced pipeline and revenue, customer acquisition cost, and pipeline velocity. And let's get into each of these in more detail. Okay, Kevin, first, website sourced pipeline and revenue. Look, we spoke about it a little bit at the outset of this episode, but I don't think measuring a marketing team on marketing sourced leads always makes sense. And it can really put the sales team in conflict with the marketing team because you're constantly fighting as to who brought in what, rather than working as one joint unit to go and win the business of the next defined best targets, which is really what we should be doing. As a general rule, Kevin, I think that the more simple and cheaper the product is that you're selling, the more ability marketing ultimately has to move a prospect from being a dream customer to a very real opportunity. This means that measuring a marketer based on the number of high intent hand raisers, i.e., demos booked, that's probably more of a fair metric because it's not a super expensive product. Hopefully doesn't take a lot of buy-in from our buying committee. It's not a huge commitment. And so marketing is able to build that trust more themselves without having as many of those one-to-one interactions that sales normally need to do to really build that trust. But on the other hand, if the sales cycle is long, it's complex, the product is complex, and it's more expensive, then there's a good chance that sales are going to have to do some heavy lifting too. You're going to need some one-to-one interactions to really personalize things, to really build that relationship. And so your method of measurement here might be more in the way of marketing influence pipeline than opportunities that are directly sourced through the website. So context is really, really key for when deciding what to measure here, Kevin. And I think back to the outset, like what we discussed, it's about identifying who our ICP is. How can we, as a marketing team and a sales team, work together to build trust, to then identify accounts who are more likely to be in market, to then work together to accelerate that demand and win them over as much as we can as a joint unit. We do also think, Kevin, that it's important to look at things like customer acquisition costs, and this is something that you guys should be reporting on as a tier 1 metric. When calculating customer acquisition cost, or CAC for short, we like to take into account costs like advertising, tech spend, and even headcount. Often time taken from service time taken from sales to service any leads that we're sending them to. And ultimately, what we want to do, Kevin, is we want to take the total revenue and then divide it by the costs associated with generating those opportunities. And if we don't take into account headcount in acquiring and servicing the leads via sales, and there's a real risk, Kevin, I think, that you lose alignment with sales. Marketing's cost per acquisition could actually decrease if they're acquiring cheaper leads, but the cost to call those leads could really increase if marketing is focusing on quantity over quality. It's something that we've covered more in other episodes, Kevin, and other articles on the B2B Playbook, and we'll link to that in the show notes. Kevin, one other method of measurement that we look at and reporting when it comes to these demand gen programs is pipeline velocity. Pipeline velocity ultimately measures how long it takes a business to move a customer through the sales funnel or pipeline from really the point where they said that they need a product or service like yours all the way through to converting them into a paying customer. Pipeline velocity grows when more customers buy more faster. And this is a pretty important metric because it really ensures that our marketing efforts are aligned on quality, not just quantity. Quality means that we care more about what happens to a deal and not just whether or not an MQL was sourced. So we provide other information around pipeline velocity too as a metric, Kevin. I don't want to get into it on this episode because it's a whole other kettle of fish, can of worms to open. But it's a great metric for marketing to track to really make sure that it's aligned to sales and aligned to business outcomes.
Listeners, there you have it. There's the tier 1 metrics that you should be looking at. And that is our 3-tier approach to measuring success with your demand generation programs. It's gotten a little wider than we thought the discussion would be. We got into the weeds a little bit more than we thought we would, but I think all very helpful information. But to help summarize those key takeaways from this episode, there's 3 tiers to your reporting as a demand marketer that you should really be focused on. The goal is to get to tier 1 eventually, but you'll likely need to go through and report on those tier 2 and tier 3 metrics that we just talked about first, depending on the maturity of your marketing program, in particular your demand generation program. And also keep in mind that this reporting flips marketing and puts revenue at the top of measurement for success, which is a metric that your executives can understand. So you can communicate directly with your executives about the impact that marketing is having, and also to really align with the sales team as well. So so you're not spending your time trying to justify marketing's existence and fighting with sales. Instead, you should be working as one unit to grow the business as a whole.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, listeners and viewers, as always, you can find links to everything we discussed in the show notes. And Kevin and I are so grateful that every week more and more marketers tune in every Monday to the B2B Playbook podcast and tune into our YouTube as well. If we could ask one thing, it would be to please pass the show on to someone who you think would get value from it. It's a huge help to us. It's a huge help to our future listeners and viewers, and we really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Kevin. Take care and catch you next week.
Thank you, listeners and viewers. Thank you, George. Take care and catch you all next week.